My face flaming, I ducked out the door and ran across the parking lot to Century Antiques. As I pushed the door open, the old bell bonged above me. The high-ceilinged room I entered was filled with old furniture, farm implements, and crockery. I dodged around a carousel horse and an old sewing machine to where Cammie's dad, Bob Craiglander, was sitting at a roll-top desk reading. He glanced up from his Soldier of Fortune magazine, surprised. I gulped air for a minute. A couple of women got into the men's restroom by mistake. Mr. Craiglander flung his magazine high in the air and roared with laughter. "Now, let me tell you one," he said. "One time about 6 years ago, I went downtown to the Dome to watch a baseball game. At halftime, I went out to use the restroom. You've been down there, haven't you? They have the words men and women printed in 6-foot letters on the walls beside the restroom doors. Well, I got out there into the hall area, came around a pillar, and saw men. So I went through the door. Nobody seemed to be inside, which was funny in itself. Suddenly, I heard some voices in the stalls, and they were women's voices. Well, I was out of there in a flash. I was lucky security didn't come along." "What went wrong?" I asked. "Had they painted the signs wrong?" "No, I just hadn't been careful enough. When I came around the pillar, I saw men. I didn't keep watching. Actually, what I saw was the last half of the word women." Mr. Craiglander threw back his head and laughed again. "So the moral of the story is to—" The bell rang again. I glanced around. Sheila stood in the doorway, breathing heavily, her face red. "Somebody," she gasped, "somebody switched the restroom signs." Mr. Craiglander stared at her. "Switched the signs? You sure?" She nodded. "I was in the restroom and a man came in. I screamed, not so much because I was scared, but because I was surprised." "That just happened to be me," I said. "They're switched," she repeated. "I looked at them as I ran out." "Well," frowning Mr. Craiglander got to his feet. "You both better get over there right now and guard those doors until I find some tools. Tell people the restrooms are temporarily closed." Sheila and I hurried out of the store and took up our positions. "Look at this, Sheila," I said, staring at the signs. "Look at what?" "These signs aren't bolted in," I said. "The brass frames are, but the nameplates are the plastic sliding kind. All the sign switchers had to do was slide them out and change them." "This one's too tight," Sheila said, fingering the lady's sign plate. "Push on it." She did, and finally was able to move it. Who'd do a thing like that? I wondered. "Guy," she suggested. "He's a joker, Krug. That little idiot." "I'm not saying it was him," she said. I, I hope he'd have sense enough not to alienate Hamlet shoppers. All the same," I began, just as Bob Craiglander hurried over, a tool belt around his waist and a fistful of screws in his hands. "Hey, listen," he said tersely. "If I ever catch the guy who did this, I'll— Know what happened to me just now?" "What?" I asked. "This woman bursts in through my side entrance and skins me up one side and down the other. She says she and another woman were in the restroom, and this boy shoulders his way in." "I didn't shoulder my way in," I said mildly. "I just walked over to the right of them." "Whatever," Mr. Craiglander said moodily. "Anyway, she says she and her friend will never come back to the hamlet again. Not with all the perverts running around these days." 2 customers lost forever. He peered at the signs. Hey, these signs are those sliding kind. Whoever had them installed should have their head examined. Well, we'll fix them so that Lucifer himself can't move them. Switching the signs back to their original places, Mr. Craiglander began boring holes in the plastic nameplates with a small hand drill, muttering all the while. Kids, he said contemptuously. No discipline, no backbone. I can't believe some of the things they do. Let me tell you what I saw about a year ago. Sheila began to make noises about having to go to the center, but he urged her to say, just listen for a minute. Just tell me if I'm not right. About a year ago, I was down south of the city, driving on the freeway. It was late at night, and I was heading home after an antique dealer's convention. Up ahead of me, I see this pedestrian overpass. Not for cars, but for walkers and joggers, that sort of thing. It's got a wire fence on both sides so that people can't jump off. I recognized that walkway because it's one I used to jog over when I lived in that part of town, just before we came up here. Now up ahead of me is the next lane over. There's this big old Lincoln Continental, huge car. And what do I see on that walkway but 2 people? 2 teenagers, as it turned out. They're acting kind of funny. There's a street light really close, and as I get closer, I see that one of them has his arms raised, and he's either trying to climb up or trying to push something up and over the top lip of the wire. And I get this awful feeling in my chest because that was about the time we were hearing all those stories about kids dropping rocks on passing cars. Well, I veer over to the left really quick, and then I realize that this big Lincoln is in the same lane that's directly under the kids. I don't even have time enough to honk my horn. I see the car go under the walkway, and I see this big rock, must have been the size of one of my shoes, sail down and just miss the tail of that car. Well, quick as a flash, I know just what to do. I know there's an exit close by, so I take it and then double back through the side streets to where that walkway is. I know this area like the back of my hand. Now, if those 2 kids are on foot, I'm out of luck. But if they have a car, it could only be on one side of the freeway. And I know exactly where they'd have to park it. It's where I used to park my own car when I jogged. Sure enough, I got to the spot and see an old beat-up brown Datsun. I shine my headlights on it just long enough to get the license number, and then I go back down a block and turn around and park there with my lights out. Suddenly I see a couple of kids run lickety-split toward that car and jump in. I ducked down sideways in my seat and they roar past me. And then I just mosey my way down to the police station, tell my story, and report the license number. And they got him? And they got him, Mr. Craiglander concluded gloatingly. They got the little jerks. Turns out that a couple of minutes after the Lincoln had passed, another car came by and they put a rock the size of a grapefruit almost in the driver's chest. It shook him up quite a bit. They tried one of the kids as an adult. He'd already had a juvenile record as long as your arm, and the other one they turned loose to some sort of community service program. It just goes to show you, doesn't it? Sheila departed with no comment. And a couple of minutes later, I did too. That was Monday. Tuesday was a busy shopping day, and we had a great time at the gazebo. I did 3 caricatures, and Cammie earned about $6 for her violin playing. Guy was busy working up a juggling routine so that he could be part of the entertainment. Wednesday afternoon, we got another shock. Guy was waiting for Cammy and me as we got off the church school van. Only this time, he wasn't juggling. His face was white and serious. Dina Wentworth was right, he said almost in a whisper. What do you mean? There's a weird old guy down at the gazebo. He's wearing a dirty army jacket, and he's playing a guitar.